In 1900, at the turn of this century, Americans of African descent were a majority of the population of the port city of Wilmington, North Carolina. Black historian W.E.B. DuBois wrote,
"The Negro race, like all races, is going to be saved by its exceptional men. We must seek to raise a talented tenth among us, who would become the intelligent leaders and directors of our masses. Such a talented tenth must look upon themselves as the servants to do the work for the great mass of the uneducated and the inexperienced."
Fire by platoon! First platoon!
The Civil War removed the yoke of slavery from the Negro, and Reconstruction briefly brought African Americans into political power in North Carolina. But most African Americans remained in the yoke of poverty. Minority power was met with resistance from the dominant white community. Within the black community, a highly educated and professional aristocracy emerged. This talented tenth provided political and economic leadership, which guided African Americans toward the improved status they hold today. North Carolina's best-known novelist, Thomas Wolfe, paid homage to contributions of our ancestors in his prologue to Look Homeward, Angel. Of a stone, a leaf, a door, he wrote, and of all the forgotten faces. But the accomplishments of North Carolina's foremost black families are not forgotten. Their heritage lives on in their achievements. In the Cape Fear region of the state, most of the skilled craftsmen were African American. Stonemasons, cabinet makers, blacksmiths, carpenters, and jewelers shared in the leadership of the black community, with lawyers, doctors, and businessmen. Certain families devoted themselves to the pursuit of education and improved economic status for their children, and for their children's children, and for all African American people. 5 of these families distinguished themselves in business, education, architecture, law, and publishing. The largest black-owned enterprise in America is led by the Spaulding family of Bladen and Columbus counties. Founded in 1898 and headquartered in Durham, the billion-dollar business provides jobs and insurance protection for thousands of African Americans. Members of Wilmington's Young and Heart Club lived and worked alongside the Spaulding family, as well as other prominent African American families of the area. Their memories underscore the achievements of this distinguished heritage.
I was a deputy manager for North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company for about 4 years, selling industrial and ordinary insurance. And I felt real great selling and working for a black company.
This is the official logo of the family. Farming, we have the tractors, which are today. We have the North Carolina Mutual, the original building, the new building. We have the turpentine, which is one of the first businesses the family was in. And Benjamin Spaulding, the original, started the turpentine business. His sons carried it on. The original Spaulding accumulated 5,000 acres in his lifetime. And his children and their children increased that to 65,000 acres at the time of the Civil War. And to date, the descendants of those children, we own over 100,000 acres. And of course, my father accumulated 1,000 acres himself. Half of our land was owned by white people who sold their land and went north, or went to Florida. But we've held on to our land, and we still have it. It's right there in the community, and you can go 10 miles in one direction and 20 miles in another direction. You won't get anything but just the descendant land. The original Benjamin Spaulding had 9 sons and 1 daughter, and they had 84 children. And those 84 children extended the family to 300 and some. And so we're anywhere from 5 generations to 8 generations to date. And we planned and held our first family reunion in '82. And we had 700 in attendance of that family reunion, the first one.
The Sadgwar family is known and loved for its cultural and spiritual achievements. David Sadgwar was a freed slave of French and English heritage. The North 8th Street home place of his descendants has become the headquarters of the Baha'i faith in Wilmington.
I have known the Sadgwars for many years, but I was closer to Felice than any of the others. There were 12 of them, and they went out of their way to help others. She worked with the W.E.B during right after World War II, or during that time, and gave free music lessons to people who could not pay for their lessons.
I knew Miss Sadgwar as a dedicated teacher. She taught more than just subject matter. She instilled in her students determination, love of music, love of poetry, and many other attributes that could not be found in the textbooks. When she talked to you, the tone of her voice was so kind and so inviting that you would want to stay in school, whatever the circumstances. It was really a privilege to have known Miss Felice Sadgwar.
They claim most of us have a little prejudice in our hearts. You have to be a very big-hearted person to be able to love mankind as a whole as your brothers, because we are all the children of God.
Free black Henry Taylor came to Wilmington from Fayetteville in 1823 and built many notable historic buildings in the port city. He also built a Taylor dynasty, which has carried on his tradition of hard work and high achievement.
One of the very first goals of our grandfather, Henry Taylor, was for people to become economically secure. His first objective was to have an education, and he stressed the importance of that. As a result of those two things, he not only bought property himself, he helped to build property, build houses, and he encouraged people to buy property, to be independent, not to depend on somebody else, but to have something of your own.
He tried to help. They did not live a selfish life. They were successful, but they tried to spread that success to their fellow man. They wanted their fellow man to climb that ladder as well as they climbed the ladder. If it did take round by round, they wanted them to take round by round, but climb the same ladder that they had. But don't think that there wouldn't be some hardships. But you don't let hardships throw you down. You still climb.
Henry Taylor had a vision. He wanted a better education for himself, his family, and for humanity. It was the beginning of a history of 6 generations of educated people. He had 4 children, two boys and two girls. One boy was Robert R. Taylor. He was an architect. I think he might have gotten his first training from his grandfather, who he wasn't classed as an architect, but he was a builder, because he had a part in the building of the Bellamy Mansion. He also built Hemingway School, and he had signed his name and had a check for the amount that he was paid for the building of Hemingway School. Then we had Robert R. Taylor, who's an architect in Tuskegee. He built many of the buildings in Tuskegee, and he also went to Liberia and built some of the buildings there. He had a son, John E. Taylor. He was a deputy of customs here in Wilmington, North Carolina. He was a real estate person. Then he had a daughter, Mariah, that married Dr. Schober, who was a physician. And to that union there were two children born. Then there was my mother, Sarah, who married John Whiteman, a wood dealer, and they had 6 children. 1 died in infancy, 5 lived. All 5 of those children were educated, continuing the tradition that our grandfather started. His first home was on 7th Street between Chestnut and Grace. My grandfather was one of the founders of Chestnut Street Presbyterian Church, and I do think that the success that he made and the things that he was able to do all stem back to his first priority with his belief in Jesus Christ. He saw that the lady, the women, and the men were educated because he too felt the necessity of both of them being educated, and he indoctrinated them with the idea of having faith in God.
I'm the great-great-granddaughter of Henry Taylor, and I'm an attorney, and I think that my educational background is typical of people in my generation, because in our family, education is an expectation on both college as well as for professional school. So when I went to college, it wasn't a question of whether or not I was going to go to college, but what college I was going to go to, and I was fortunate to have the choice of any college on the map that I wanted to go to. I'm a graduate of Wellesley College, one of the 7 sister colleges in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and also University of Virginia Law School in Charlottesville, Virginia. And my interest and practice is in the business area of law. I think I've been fortunate to have a family that really has challenged my mind, that has encouraged me to read, that has really worked with me and encouraged me, not just when I was successful, but also in times when I was striving to succeed. In 1987-88, I was Miss Virginia for the Miss Hemisphere pageant, and I think that has been a surprise to many people that a black woman has won in that capacity. So I think that all ties into the theme of Henry Taylor and the things that he set forth to do, because he didn't see obstacles, or if the obstacles were there, he turned them into opportunities. And he, as a black man, was able to be an example, to be a pioneer, and to go into a situation and make the best out of it. And I see my generation as going forward with that effort in the same way, to not necessarily look at a situation in terms of color, because we all know that we are black or African American, but we all are very aware that it's important to be in the mainstream.
The Giblin Lodge and the Hemingway School, both of those were opportunities not only for the African American to have growth and progress, but it also provided in this community for the white portion of the population too. And these are contributions in stone, which means that they're still around generations after he's gone. My mother and also my aunts were teachers, and I have been a teacher for approximately 32 years. And it's interesting. I think I have taught every major race in the world. And particularly have I taught African Americans. As I am currently now teaching at a predominantly black university, which is the third largest university, predominantly black university in the United States. I went there for the purpose of sharing what I thought was unusual opportunities that I had had, and and I went there to pass on the results of what I had experienced prior to coming there, and to share them with other Afro-American students.
Martin Luther King saw a dream, but my grandfather saw a dream long before Martin Luther King. And he saw the dream that his children must, and his grandchildren, must be educated to compete. Because it's a world where you've got to compete.
Judge Armand Scott of Wilmington was appointed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt as the first African-American judge in the New Deal administration. For 22 years, his word was law in Washington, D.C. As a young man, Armand, with his brother Warren, started a newspaper to earn money for their education. He earned a law degree and practiced law until the Wilmington race riots of 1898 forced him to flee to Washington. In 1935, Armand Scott received his judicial appointment in the District of Columbia.
That would be your great-great-grandparents. And that's your Uncle Armand being sworn in when he was appointed a judgeship. Since time began, we educated our kids as best we could, and we had a lot of, that's why the race riots. There were a lot of educated blacks who held responsible jobs and were leaders in the community. And of course, you had the element that felt they were too progressive. And they were progressive because they were educated. That's a simple fact. You know, we have a tradition in this family that we expect great things of everybody. So, and of course it was a male-dominated family for years, and now it's just the opposite. My grandparents had 7 sons. My mother had 6 sons. His mother did just the opposite. She had 6 girls and 2 boys.
I was joking with Aunt Catherine about the job that I do. It concerns pretty much trying to encourage young kids to be scientists, and I work in an urban setting, and so a lot of the kids that I work with are black. I think I'm doing pretty much the work of the Scotts and the Willistons as far as encouraging blacks to do more in education and in science, because it's always not just been education, but it's always been striving to, I don't know, to be their best in whatever they do, and it's a strong pride.
Armand Scott's descendants carry on his legacy of achievement and service. Catherine Scott Moore is president of a large trucking company. Frances Weller anchors the nightly news for Wilmington's NBC affiliate, and twin sister Margaret is director of Crisis Line Open House and the Rape Crisis Center. High expectations are passed from generation to generation.
For those who are fortunate enough to have parents who are interested in their welfare and well-being, they must keep in their mind set a goal and work towards that goal. Absorb all that you can, education speaking. Education is the key to everything. Unless you have that, you're lost.
Newspaper publishing, a tradition in the Jervay family. Tom Jervay has been editor of the Wilmington Journal for half a century, since he took it over from his father, R.S. Jervay, who began publishing in 1927. His brother, Paul Jervay, publishes the Carolinian in Raleigh, with the help of his son, Paul Jr.
Of course, I subscribe to it, and I can hardly wait for it to get there to see what's happening or what has happened. And I believe I remember almost when Mr. Jervay started it. We had it in our homes, well, when I was just beginning to read almost.
The journal is different. The journal sort of puts us up front where we belong.
The only place we would get the publicity would be with the Wilmington Journal, or at that time it was the Cape Fear Journal.
One thing I've always heard my uncle T.C. in Wilmington and my father say in regards to black newspaper is that it exists not because of circumstances, but in spite of them. And in view of that, it's been a long and sometimes difficult road to get to where we are in the 80s and to look forward to springboarding into the 90s.
In 1972, racial conflict once more erupted, and the Wilmington 10 were convicted and put into prison. In 1980, their prison sentences were commuted by the governor. During this period, the offices of the black newspaper The Wilmington Journal were bombed, just across the street from the site of the Daily Record blaze of 1898.
At the time the building was bombed, the case was in litigation up and down the line between the different courts. We supported giving the fellas and the one lady involved a fairer trial than we think they had gotten here.
I share many of the beliefs that the job is not complete as far as equal rights, as far as housing needs, as far as a lot of ills that exist in the American society as a whole, as it impacts on blacks. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. There are a lot of things that need to be said to affect some of those things getting done, and about the only place that they will be said in a demonstrative type way is on a black newspaper.
It is a source of inspiration to me, and I try to give it to the young people to know that how much our fathers or grandfathers, I call them all relatives from their part, have done so much to help us to live. What are we doing now as heirs of this legacy? What imprint will we make upon this community as we move along?
These 5 families have devoted themselves to high achievement as leaders in their community. Hard work, a good education, and faith in the future have been the foundation of their lives. The Spaulding, Sadgwar, Taylor, Scott, and Jervay descendants carry on this tradition and set an example for today's generation of African Americans.